The Pontchartrain Park Pioneers Oral History Project is presented by the Center for African and African American Studies at Southern University at New Orleans and the following sponsors. The National Park Service, the United States Department of the Interior through the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the Division of Historic Preservation. The first 15 minutes of the interview featuring Mr. Edgar Poree were inadvertently damaged. The following is a synopsis of Mr. Edgar Poree's recollections of his early life and introduction to Pontchartrain Park. Edgar Poree was born on October 5, 1936, in a room behind the family's barber shop located on the corner of Lafitte and North Prior Streets in New Orleans, Louisiana. He grew up in a segregated downtown community adjacent to the sprawling Lafitte housing project. Poree was instilled with a strong work ethic as a child. Moreover, after being detained in the third grade, he developed a lifelong commitment to education and the accumulation of knowledge. He attended Craig Elementary School, Joseph S. Clark High School, and Xavier University. It was at Craig Elementary School where he met Gloria Guichard, to whom he would become married in 1959. Soon afterwards, both of the Porees became teachers in the New Orleans public school system. In 1964, at 27 years of age, Poree and his young bride Gloria would move into Pontchartrain Park. The interview resumes with Edgar Poree explaining how he earned the money to purchase his new home.
At King Simon shop, right around the corner from Mr. Dan's Grocery, 2 blocks from my house. I used to go there, Mr. King, what you let me do it? What you let me do that? And guess what they used to do before you had the stuff that cleaned the windows, like Windex? They used to put red compound on a potato sack that was wet, and then it would film up like white. You wipe it, and that's what you did the bumpers with. That's how I learned how to do the floors, because the same process, all you're doing is doing that, right? So your cars would go for $6 or $8, and $2.50 and $3 for a car wash. So if you had a car wash, right, I see your car, I'd go there and wash the car. I picked up another $3, so I'm up at $10 in that $5 house, right? Then when bourgeois moved around Dillard University and they had picture windows, you know, before you had everything closed, but now you got the square windows, got a fancy lamp sitting on a nice little table, and you open it up, and you got the wooden Venetian blinds, okay? The wooden Venetian blinds is 2 inches wide, right? It gathers dust. If you got Venetian blind, I just take them now and go throw them over the line in the yard, take a bucket of water, let the sun dry them. I got $12.50 in my $5 house. That's how I was able to buy the house and put that money down, because while they were going to the balls, I was slaving, working around the clock. And my wife used to always get upset when I said, you know, that poor guy, he's a lucky son of a gun. And he was working his off.
Wow, you just described the process as to how you purchased your home. Now, you were a veteran. Did you use the VA bill?
I've never used it, because technically back then, if you didn't go to war, you didn't get it. But they told me subsequent to that, I could have had the same, because I got discharged. But I never did. I never used it.
And at the time you purchased your house, you and your wife were both teachers.
Right.
You're
at Johnson Lockett.
Your 8-hour job.
Right.
Then you had. Did your wife have other?
No, she just taught. No, she just taught school.
Now, you knew about and you had heard a lot of positive things about Pontchartrain Park when you moved in. Were there any negatives that you had heard?
No, I didn't hear negatives, but you know, I'm one of these guys who believe in keeping it real. Okay, they didn't refer to themselves, I live in Pontchartrain Park. I live in the park, P-A-R-K. Right? I live in the park. And I never forget, after I moved in there were just some people who were in the kind of the high end of our community, who were in the social clubs that I've never belonged to. You were kind of on the outside. And I was a men's day speaker at Bethany United Methodist Church. And I was trying, Dr. Robinson, I was trying to figure out why the garbage men were literally fighting over picking up the garbage in Pontchartrain Park. And I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't figure it out. Why are they like having like a raffle to get to Pontchartrain Park? And I was a men's day speaker. And I'm going to tell you, I've been a rebel a long time. I was a men's day speaker. And I was telling them a story that I'm telling you, and I said I couldn't figure out why everybody was fighting to get to pick up the garbage in Pontchartrain Park. Well, I knew with the notes that they had on the mortgage, there wasn't much in the garbage can over the weekend. And the pastor said, "You did not go there, Mr. Poree." Yes, I did. I was bad, Dr. Robinson. I was a terror, you hear me? I was a little terror. But that was the only negative. It was just that although you're living here, it was wonderful. You were still not really accepted in certain circles. Okay?
Now, when you moved into the park, did you and your wife have any children?
Yeah, we had my oldest daughter, who was born in 61. And I lost a daughter, Dana. Dana died in my arms. And back then they just called it crib death. She lived for 32 days. And we noticed that she, like, it was jumping like that, her body. And when they did a scan, the young lady, they were doing a brain scan. And, God is good all the time. When the technician saw, when they were scanning the left side, I could see it in her face that there was something. So she probably would have been a handicapped kid. And it was Dr. Bro, who lived across the street. When I was just rocking Dana in my arms, her little head just dropped to the side. And I just walked over to Bro's house within my arms. And he said he's gone. And that was the most difficult time during my 54 years of marriage with my wife. That was just difficulty. And she'd wake up in the middle of the night and say, "The baby's crying." Let me tell you, that used to go through me. But Lord, when my son came, oh Lord, today I had time to do nothing but go to school. I was the PTA president for every school that my son attended. Every school. I said, I might as well make my time worthwhile, because I was going to get a call from whatever teacher it was, because he was just like his Paul. I was a character in school too.
Now, did your children attend school in the park? Did they go to college?
Cargill, yep. Yeah, they went to Cargill, and Deidre went to St. Mary's in 7th grade. Edgar went to, with his Gregory, after he got out of Cargill school.
Now, your son was born while you and your wife lived in Pontchartrain Park.
Right, yes.
And your child who passed was born while you were in Pontchartrain Park.
Yes.
Now, describe your home's floor plan, the one that you
I had
built
3
in Pontchartrain
bedrooms.
Park.
This was interesting. This was the Cadillac houses in Pontchartrain Park. We had 3 bedrooms, ceramic tile bath. You had a bath and a half. You had a 4x4 shower in the bathroom next to the bedroom. You had a built-in kitchen, and you had central air conditioning. It was 1,685 square feet, and it was $25,700. Can you imagine $25,700 for a house? Oh man! Oh, we were uptown.
So you actually designed your home.
Well, I saw the plans. They had the plans, and because the house wasn't built yet. And I said, well, what is this? And he said, that's a built-in. I said, a built-in kitchen? And, and I said, air conditioned? Oh, man, I was freaking out.
Now, your houses in downtown, they didn't have built-in kitchens?
What you mean, on Bienville Street?
Yes.
No. The house on Bienville Street, the first 3 rooms had plaster in it, okay? And Bienville Street was a heavily traveled, which was a major street. So those big trucks, and eventually that plaster would crack, right? And then a large chunk would fall out of it, all right? Well, my daddy was in World War I, and my daddy had over 550 books during his lifetime and read them from cover to cover. So he was a man of knowledge, okay? And then when the plaster would crack and fall and you have a big old hole there, you know what we would do for that? You know what we would do? Mr. Brown. You remember Mr. Brown I was telling you about? Mr. Brown's friend was Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson used to work in a factory where they packed china dishes and stuff. And they used to pack them with cellulose and stuff. So my dad would say, what are you doing with that cellulose? Oh, we throw it away. He said, don't throw it away. Just bring it here. Okay? All right? When the plaster would crack or a big patch would fall, my daddy would take the lattice at the top, pull the first 3 boards out, and he'd take the cellulose and he'd pour in between. Guess what that was? That was insulation. That was insulation back in the 40s. Okay? All right. And then what my dad would do, we would go to Swin Bicycle, we sit on St. Peter Street, St. Peter and Claiborne, and we'd get the box that they shipped the bikes in. Guess what size the box was? 6 by 4 by 1. Well, if you open up a 6 by 4 by 1, you got 14 square feet. Guess what that was? That was our drywall. And so what my dad did, he did a template of the side of the hole. And he put that in there because, the plaster is like almost 3/4 of an inch. Okay? So he put 2 layers of the template in there. And then we take that big 14-foot piece there, because we had the 12-foot ceilings at the time. That was our drywall. And that's how I learned how to wallpaper. So that other thing, when I was showing you the other thing that I was doing when I was married, I was wallpapering at the same time. All right.
Now, that's very interesting. When you first moved into the park, what was it like?
Serene. It was simply beautiful. It was driving in there and seeing kids playing. Well, you're in the neighborhood, you're all crouched out with just the beauty, the serenity of it. And you were close to everything. I had the Maison Blanches and the Sears and the other stores right out there in Gentilly Woods, and you had Grant's, and you had a theater there in Gentilly Woods.
Now, what was the address?
6219 Providence Place, right behind Southern. Right behind Southern.
In addition to your sister and cousin, did you have any other friends and relatives?
Well, Dr. Walter Austin was not only my friend, he was my mentor. Dr. Walter Austin should have been the guy who took Dr. Bashford's place. The man was brilliant. He was sharp as he could be. He was sharp. He was the guy who set up the government structure in Nigeria. He was heavyweight. That was my next door neighbor. He preceded Larry McKinley, who became my next door neighbor. And he was instrumental in getting me out of the classroom.
When he got you out of the classroom, where did you go?
1966. I was a 6th grade teacher for those 8 years.
And when he got you out of the classroom?
And he got me out of the classroom. Dr. Carl Dosey was appointed the superintendent of all these parish schools in 1966. And the first thing he said was he wanted new revenue. I was sharp in math. And I told my wife, I am out of the classroom. I am out of doing these jobs. Your man is no longer a servant. And she used to always refer to me as the dreamer. She said, what are you dreaming about? This man said he wanted to do a 1-cent sales tax to raise revenue for teachers and to bring more money to Wichcombe. I said, I'm out of here. And it was Dr. Walter Austin. I went over there and got the statistics of when was the last sales tax passed for education. Did my research, okay? And I put together a 72-page strategic plan for Orleans Parish School and called Dr. Dosey up and said, I have the plan that will get you the money. And I had a 2-hour and 30-minute meeting with Dr. Dosey. And he said, this is terrific, young man, but a typical politician, he said, we got to let the lawyers look at this to see whether or not it's not in violation for a school teacher to participate in a political process. Okay? We'll get back to you. Well, I didn't give him my original. I gave him the copy that was done on a mimeograph machine, okay? Because the secretary at the school typed the 72 pages, all right? 2 weeks, don't hear anything. In the 3rd week, a letter comes to the school, Edgar Poree, school coordinator. The lady who typed them 72 pages said, Edgar, they stole your work. So I went to the Western Union office and asked them, how could I send a telegram and ensure that the person I was sending it to had to sign it? And I didn't know that. You had to send a registered telegram. And guess what I did? I followed the courier because Mr. Dosey, Dr. Dosey, had to sign it. All right? So when he saw me, he said, Mr. Poree, did we have an appointment? I said, no, we didn't, but we better have one. So I go in his office, and he said, nobody called you? I said, they didn't have to call me. They had the plan. And it was Dr. Stump, Edwin Stump, who later became the Dean of Graduate School of LSU NO. He was in there. He was the Associate Superintendent of Pupil Placement. He said, Carl, I don't know what political ramification, but anybody who can put that together ought not be in the classroom. And guess what? The next day, I am out of the classroom, okay? But guess what? Guess what happened? 12 black principals requested an emergency meeting with Dr. Dosey because they wanted to know how this arrogant, egotistical, short-term teacher was working in the headquarters. And they said he had a plan. And so we did the plan, and it was Dr. Austin who gave me the strategy for taking the polls. And we did a figure of 71.35. We're going to get a 71.25 yes vote. And all of the political pundits said, Dr. Dosey, you might be good in math, but that's crazy. Guess what the score was? 71.37. Bow, bow, bow. Okay? So bam, the guy who steals my work gets employed. Bob Walls. $25,000. He gets hired by Orleans Parish School. Dr. Henry Williams had just gotten his master's degree from Harvard. He comes back, and he's the first black associate superintendent. He gets hired for $20,000. He reports to the high school guy, who is a high school guy who, when Chef Morrison, that's why I'm telling you about Chef Morrison, when Chef Morrison was running for mayor, this guy was a photographer, and all he went around is taking pictures at all of the rallies. And when Chef Morrison won, he gave him the album of all those pictures, and he became an executive assistant to Chef Morrison. That's how he got the job to run the sales tax with my program. And I didn't get anything. And we went to the rally, and my wife had tears in her eyes. She said, all that you did, they didn't even mention your name. Well, it was Ed Stump who got me out of the classroom. He called me, he said, I'm embarrassed. He said, there's anti-poverty. Ain't nothing guaranteed. It's for 12 weeks. You make $135 a week, and then there are 2 weeks that you wrap up the program. So I'm almost making that $4,400 that I was making teaching school over that period of time. Well, he didn't know whether or not he was going to be funded. All right. So they put a proposal in, and I wrote myself in for 14 grand. I was making $4. In 1966. I was making $4,400 teaching school, and they said, "Well, what's your salary going to be?" I said, $14,000, and it got funded. Bang! First thing I did, I went and bought that '66 Mustang for this beautiful lady, and I got a big red bow and tied it around that thing and drove it 6219 Providence Place. And when she came home with her girlfriend, she said, "Who that's for?" I said, "The dreamer has struck again." I didn't mean to deviate and get off the track, but it's all a part of the story.
It's a very important part of the story. You're probably one of them, but identify some of the legends from the neighborhood, some of the people who were VIPs.
Well, you had, you know, Dutch and his family, your family from an educational standpoint, your dad and your mom. Leon Fulton with the insurance, Stephen Johnson with the insurance business, and the Sterling Henry when Sterling was there, and Dr. Oh no, I don't know whether it's all-time, but the doctor who built the house on Press Drive.
Dr. Ford.
No, not Dr. Ford.
Dr. Adams.
Not Dr. Adams. The one who has a swimming pool.
Dr. Pratt.
Dr. Pratt. I landscaped. Oh, that was another thing I used to do. I landscaped Dr. Pratt's house and his pool, and he was a God-fearing man who, when they were operating this oversized lady, she was coming off of the operating table, and he kept her from falling, and he was ruined for life. Popped his spine. Dr. Pratt. Dr. Pratt was class personified. He was genuine. He gave to his church. He gave to the neighborhood. He was really a real pioneer. A real pioneer. Those were the ones that and of course Mac Knox with all he did for young people in the park. They were really the troopers.
You mentioned earlier that there was some very early bourgeoisies who had moved into the community. Did your family see you as being any different as a result of moving into Pontchartrain Park?
Well, we had some folks in my family. He lives in the park. I said I live in Pontchartrain Park. I would never use "I live in the park" because that was just like with me. You know, I keep it real, Dr. Robinson. You know, it's just that if you don't lose who you are and you get caught up in the social stuff, you know, it's just like my wife would say, "Why do you have to tell everybody what's got back?" I said, "Because it ain't where you come from determines where you're going." I said, my being a class clown, I was also smart enough that I wasn't going to be kept back anymore. You know, to say get back, stay back, I got on an accelerated roll, brother, that it was just unbelievable.
Let's go back to talking about your children. Were there any advantages to rearing your children in Pontchartrain Park?
Oh yeah, you never had to bother about them after school because it was safe. You knew that they had the extended family watching over them. And when you walked in the park, to go home. And as I said earlier, your neighbors knew where you should have been at a certain time, you know. And it was just a healthy environment. You knew when they went on the park, you didn't bother about anybody but doing anything to them. They were safe. They had recreation there. And then they had golf. They had a golf course there. And it was the golf course that was about to do something to destroy the integrity of Pontchartrain Park. A lot of whites used to come in because it was convenient. Okay? But then somebody wanted to put a fence around the golf course. A picket fence. I was on the Park and Parkway Commission at the time. And that's the one good thing that I did, because I didn't do anything else on that board. When they wanted to place a fence to protect the children who may get hit by a golf ball. Okay? And I won't call the guy's name, but he didn't even live in the park, but he was an uppity guy. But he played golf in the park. Okay? He was one of the pushers for the fence. And he did this long tirade about protecting the children with the golf balls getting hit in the head. I said, I lived in a neighborhood that had nothing but fences. And then we got liberated for open space. We ain't put no damn fences out in Pontchartrain Park. And he said, I'm a taxpayer. I said, but you don't live here, brother. You ain't in the neighborhood. You're not in the neighborhood. And the community was galvanized, and we prevented that fence from getting up there.
Very interesting. That's a story I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, they wanted to put an 8-foot chain link fence around the entire golf. Can you imagine? The aesthetics would just go away. And then you can't get to the other side of the park. And the other thing was they were afraid that they might drown in the lagoon. Boy, they had so much.
We know some of the advantages of rearing children in Pontchartrain Park. Were there some disadvantages to rearing your children in Pontchartrain Park?
No, the only disadvantage I would think is that when kids who lived in Pontchartrain Park went other places in the city, you know, they were perceived as uppity, and they weren't. And sometimes that caused some problems at schools when they went outside of the district that they normally would go outside.
Did your children, we talked about the park, we talked about the recreational opportunities. Were your children involved in the NORD program?
Oh yeah, with Mac there, yeah. My son played, you know, bitty ball, USA ball, and basketball for the park. My daughter was more academically involved than my son. She was always in the books.
Let's talk about general family recreation. What did you and the family do in the neighborhood for recreation? I know in certain communities, certain blocks, people would get together.
Well, we would. Now we didn't do too much of that, but we were more in our blocks. You know, you knew the people, the Billy Willises and the Gilmets and all those that you knew those persons within 5 blocks. You knew them by name. You would converse with them. You'd have conversation with them, and then their children would be on the park, like you kids were on the park. Okay, so you knew people because you went on the park when they had all of those activities there. So you were having the conversations, and you all had the same purpose out there. You knew it was wholesome, and you knew that you could go off somewhere for hours and not bother about them being on the park, because it was that safety thing, man.
Were you a member of the Booster Club, the Pontchartrain Park Booster Club?
Yeah, at that time. Yep.
Do you remember any of the activities that you participated
Well,
in?
we used to serve in the clubhouse there for the various activities. We would fundraise for baseball and softball teams to be supportive of it. And when they had fish fries and the other thing, we would participate in that. And it would do the clubhouse was really the place where that took place.
What about the Pontchartrain Park Association?
We belong to that.
Do you remember some of your experiences with that organization?
Well, we would go. I had so many other activities that was going on that I knew that this place was well run. I spent time doing other things because at that point I was then in corporate. I was at South Central Bell at that time. And I worked in the poverty program until 71, from 66. And until 1970, I worked at a regional planning think tank, which was called Goals Foundation, for a year and a half. And I had a job offer with the Department of Labor in Dallas, Texas, because I did the handbook for the Neighborhood Youth Corps that was adopted by the U.S. Department of Labor for the regional handbook for youngsters for the Neighborhood Youth Corps. And they offered me a job in Dallas, Texas. Well, at the time, Mr. Mara Finch, who was the president of South Central Bell, he was the chairman of the board that I worked for this think tank. And I listed him as a reference. He said, well, why do you want to go to Dallas, Texas? He said, the future's in New Orleans for you. I said, $6,500 is what they offer me, more than what I'm making. And he said, the phone company is your future. And I said, Mr. Fincher, the only thing I've seen at the phone company that look like me is the people who cook in the kitchen and the one who mop the floors. He said, oh no. So my wife said, well, Edgar, the phone company's going to be there a long time. I know you like your job. I said, but that's $6,500 different. Corporate America can do anything that they want to do. They break the rules. Okay? So my wife said, you need to go with the phone company. I said, all right, I'll go to the phone company. So I come back to New Orleans, and I go to my office, and I'm packing. And the president asked the director, how long is it going to take to finish this project? And he said, about 11 months. And I'm packing my bags, okay? He said, Edgar, hold on. And he calls the office. He says, Edgar Poree is going to be a loan executive for 11 months. For 11 months, I was on the payroll working in the same job that I was working in for 2 years. Corporate can do what they want to do. Okay. And so I entered into the corporate world, and when I went there, it was an incredible experience. And it was something, young man and young lady, that I knew that whatever transpired at 2115 Bienville Street was because of what God had blessed us in the aftermath.
Now, Pontchartrain Park has two churches. One is Bethany United Methodist Church. The other is Holy Cross Lutheran.
Which was right here on the corner.
On the corner of Press,
Press.
And Bashful.
Don't mention that word to me, please, because that gets me upset.
We're going to deal with that in a second.
Okay.
What church did you attend? Church?
Bethany. My wife was Catholic. She went to St. Gabriel. I was Methodist, and we were the ones who actually built the new Bethany Church because it was in that little building on the back. And man, let me tell you about Bethany. Bethany, Protestants didn't gamble, okay, but Catholics, Catholics gamble. They had bingo, right? But my parishioners said they didn't gamble, but every Thursday night they were over at St. Gabriel. So we decided at Bethany, a little group of us, like a little offspring, like Cassio's with the Democrats, this little old crew. We say, well, we understand that a lot of our non-gambling people are over there at St. Gabriel on Thursday, so why don't we have bingo on Friday night at Bethany Church? Well, we started having bingo, and a letter was written to the superintendent saying that there were a group of sinners having gambling in the church. But we were paying for the electricity, we were paying for the furniture and the narthex. And I asked Reverend Kennedy, I said, Reverend Kennedy, would you let me do one thing? Would you let me buy the communion glasses with the money that we raised from the bingo? And he said, what do you want to do with that? I said, after they're taking communion, I want to say, I just want to let you know that those glasses that you drink God's blood out of was paid for by the bingo people. He said, Edgar, you gonna get me out of the church. Edgar was a bad boy, Dr. Robinson.
No, I'm familiar with Bethany. That was my father's church.
Yeah.
Now, your wife, she attended St. Gabriel. Did she, which was in Gentilly Woods, and
Right,
of course we
but that
know
was a Catholic
historically
church.
that was the white neighborhood,
Right.
with the Catholic church and the school
Right.
attached. And there was also a public school there, Claiborne.
Claiborne.
Did your wife experience any negative racism at St. Gabriel?
I don't think so, because she just went to church to go to church.
Your children, were they Catholic? Or
They were Catholic.
They were Catholic?
Yes.
And they attended St.
Yeah,
Gabriel
St.
as
Gabriel,
well?
right.
Did they experience any
No.
problems? Now, of course, we know that there's Gentilly Woods and there's Pontchartrain Park. Did you or your family members experience any negative experiences going to the front, being at one of the stores you mentioned, Maison Blanche?
Not
Sears?
really. Not really. But by that time, even though Gentilly Woods was still predominantly white, you just drove down once they opened Fresh Drive and Congress. It was like that ditch that separated us there. It was just you lived in Pontchartrain Park and you went to Gentilly Woods and Wichita. You saw people, you hi. If you recognized them, when you went to Schwagman's, when it was a payday, everybody who taught school, you saw them when it was a payday at Schwagman's. So that was the conversation piece. Oh, you saw them at the Maison Blanche or whatever. So the people that lived in Wichita, where you live, there was conversation because they began to see. So unlike what Thoreau was concerned about, there was Wichita, because there was a Jewish family that lived on Press Drive. The leaders, when I did the school tax thing, they recommended me for Lehigh University as a recruiter. And I went up there, and it was a great experience. But they hired somebody who was more inclined for that. But they were really, because they were the ones who acknowledged my drafting the strategic plan.
Now, you moved into Pontchartrain Park in 1964. In 1965, there was Hurricane Betsy.
Yeah.
Was your home damaged at that point?
Not too much. No, not. Because the house was brick. We had a window, I think. We had a window that was cracked, but we didn't have any real
Any
damage.
flood? Any flood?
No. Mm-mm.
So did you vacate your home? Did you evacuate?
Yeah.
Where did you go?
We went out on Bienville Street to my deceased parents' house, because that's a higher ridge like the French Quarters. My parents were paying for flood insurance when in fact that was another no flood zone for years. And it wasn't until my white co-worker, whose mother lived on Bienville Street near Calton, and they said, "Why is your mom and them paying all that money for flood insurance?" I said, "Because that's what they told us we had to pay." He said, "You go and get a $375 flood elevation, and they're going to tell you that this is not a flood zone." And my mother and them was paying 70% more than my white counterpart's mama house on Bienville Street near Calton for years.
You moved back to the park in 1965. In the 1970s, did you started seeing a change in Pontchartrain Park?
Well, there was. I changed my house 5 times. I went from a colonial house and to a moderate contemporary house. And then my wife and I went to California, and I kept asking her, let me just go on and build a huge den. She said, "Man, I'm sick and tired of you with all of your change and stuff." And we went to California, and we went to a wedding reception, and we were dancing, and I said, "Please let me build that." And I had already arranged with the contractor, if I made a phone call, the back of my house better be torn out and the concrete need to be poured, and I didn't have any backyard. I didn't have any back. And when she said, "Man, I'm sick of you with all that damn building," and I called him up, and when we got there, we stayed another 7 days. It was already framed up. And we had a den that was 35 by 22 with cathedral ceilings. It was off the chart.
Were you in the park when Hurricane Katrina struck, or had you moved?
No. We were still there. And I called my daughter and I said, "We leaving." And her husband was in Kuwait, but he wasn't in the service. He was working with one of those paid people over there. And he told her, "Oh, that's going to blow over." And she said, "Troy said it's going to blow over." I said, "I'll tell you what, you can stay here and die. I'm coming to get my 2 grandchildren, okay?" So at 5 o'clock that morning, I said, "You're going to bring those grandchildren." And we left our cars there. And we drove to Baton Rouge, and it took us 8 hours. 8 hours and 37 minutes. And I built a house in Prairieville. Because, when we looked on the computer in my solar house, we saw that the water had exceeded. It was on the rooftop. Because you can see because of Southern's plant that we knew where the house was.
So did you move back to New Orleans post-Katrina at all? Did you move into your home?
No, I moved into the house. We lived with my daughter in an apartment, and we moved. We eventually built the house, and it took me 3 months. Took me 3 months, 15 days, and 5 minutes trying to convince my wife that we were going to live in the country after living in the city for 70 years. And you know what a mother and a boy is, and a daughter and a daddy. I only become the financier at my age then, and the son is the husband. The boy was in the house 4 minutes. He said, "This is the bomb, Mama. This is it." She said, "Man, go build a goddamn house." The next day, And we built the house. And for a woman who didn't want to live in the country at all, after the grass started to germinate, and I went to get gas at a Shell station, and I went in there to get gas, and the clerk asked the sheriff, "Is that baby's husband?" And in New Orleans, everybody refers to people as, "Hey, baby, how you doing, baby? Where you going?" So I looked around, and there wasn't anybody else in there but me in the place. So when I went home, And I said, Gish, that was my pet name for my wife. I said, Gish, I said, something happened. I said, I was in there, and the clerk asked the sheriff whether or not I was babysitting, and she laughed, because that's where she played a lottery every day, every day, every day, okay? 2 weeks later, I go in her car to get a smoothie on the other side of I-10. And I got my grass cutting clothes on, but I'm riding in this hog, okay? And so there are two criminal sheriffs in the place, and I go in and I got my grass cutting clothes on. One of them is checking out the credentials on the car, and he stays out there. And I say in there, "Which car?" And when I came out there, he said, "It's a mighty fine car you're driving." I said, "That's my wife's car." Guess what he said? "Miss Gloria?" I said, "For somebody who don't want to live in the goddamn country, she knows the sheriff and all the other goddamn people. We go to the shopping center, and they hiding clothes and telling her, don't come back. They got an unpublished thing, and they hiding clothes for her." So she made the adjustment quickly. And I started introducing myself. I'm Miss Gloria's husband instead of Edgar Poree.
Are you aware of Wendell Pierce's attempts at rebuilding homes?
Oh, yeah.
What do you
He
think
and Henry?
about this?
I think it was a laudable effort, but you got to have money. You got to have financing. You know, you can have all of the plans in the world, but if you don't have capital to initiate that, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the inside track that was done with the poverty program. And that's another story that we need to talk about maybe at another time, because that was a part of that infiltration of our neighborhood that destroyed our culture.
We're closing up because we're
you're running out of tape.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oh, hey, this has been great, Mr. Poree. Your wife passed, unfortunately, some 2 years ago.
No, it's 5 years on the 28th, yeah.
28.
And after 54 years and 2 months of not being sick one day, and when she sprained her foot on the 1st of February in 2014, and in April, she was sitting in the theater at the house, and she hollered, and she said, "My leg." And I looked at her leg, it was twice the size. We rushed her to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 uterine cancer, and died on the 28th of June. But young brother, we lived the American dream.
What are your most memorable moments in Pontchartrain Park?
Well, when my son was born, because my dad was 50 when I was born, and he was born 9 years after my daughter, and on August 4th, 1970. And asked me about what I despised.
What do you despise?
When Southern University did a disservice to Dr. Bashful by naming a street that didn't even have a damn building on, one block. Instead of, if they didn't want to take Press Drive, they should have taken the 6400 block of Press Drive, which was nothing but a railroad. That's what the street was named after Press Railroad. And they should have made it Dr. Emmett Bashful Lane or Boulevard to the end of the campus. And I know that people who had press traditionally for 40 years, I can understand they don't want to change their address, but the building itself, and I told the committee, before I die, we're going to work on that. Because that needs to be changed. Because you can say anything you want about Dr. Bashful. The reason this school is here today is because when he was fighting those animals downtown, they call him Uncle Tom. But sometimes I learn about Uncle Tom. I used to see the waiters. I did waiting at the Royal Orleans one day, and I saw those black men, and I saw them, how you doing this? How you doing this? And I'd sit there and I said, I'm black and proud, okay? I said, look at that Uncle Tom. And then I went in the wrong door out the wrong door and knocked the 12 place that was on my which call. And these little bit of men that I was calling Uncle Tom, I felt guilty because the guy next door hired me that one day. He said, man, we're going to knock you off. And I waited. And you know what? They weren't Uncle Toms. They were Academy Award actors. When I saw them little white ladies taking that $5 out and that $10 out and putting in the pocket, do you know who owned property in the city of New Orleans? It wasn't the bourgeois. It was the ones who was working in Antoine's and all of the front restaurants, the porters and the witch call, and the businessmen were talking about selling the house, you know, the sheriff's sale. And then it was the people who was working Miss So-and-so's house, and she drank the tea at 9 o'clock. So the brother who was cleaning up the house and washing the dirty clothes and wearing second hand-me-downs went home and told them what house was on sale at the sheriff's office. And then they talked. They're not on the telephone, but they got the neighbors to bring the $25, and they got there before Miss Sarah got there to buy the house. And then when we integrated and we had not a briefcase, we had an attaché case at that time. And when we went to Antoine, and white folks didn't talk when they saw them brothers with them three-piece suits and the witch gone, but they were saying it when he was mopping the floor. So I found out my lesson, that it ain't Uncle Tom, it's the man who's getting the money.
Do you have any last statements, Mr. Poree? Do we cover, say anything else you'd like to cover in this interview?
I think what you're doing is a need. I would hope that we would have more folks sitting in our classrooms talking about the real side of New Orleans, because there's a whole lot that we don't talk about because it upsets some things. And I'm doing some podcasts right now with a stipulation in my will that you're going to release them of all my debts so my family cannot get sued, because there's too much. You know, they just did a piece on the Times-Picayune, okay, with the merger of the Advocate, okay, and they talked about how the Times-Picayune had disparaging words for black people. But you know what they didn't talk about? How they robbed the poverty program, okay? And I won't talk on this about that because I'm still alive. But the podcast, you'll be able to see what they did to the poverty program. And we're going to talk about the black banks also, when they weren't black banks.
Well, are you still friends with any of the old liners in Pontchartrain Park, those who are still alive?
Yeah, the man across the street, Al Turnbull, he's 96. Al Turnbull knew every birthday for my grandchildren, my babies, and grandchildren. He was a tremendous neighbor across the street.
Is he still there? Or
Yeah, he's still there. And not only that, my mom was the manager of his parents' clothing store on Rampart between Canal Street. And my dad, who was jet black, and my mama was, you know, high yellow from Mandeville, etc. I don't know. She doesn't know her grandfather. Her mother worked for a plantation owner who we suspect was my mom's daddy. And my dad used to go and pick up the clothes. They thought he was the house nigga.
Any other people that you're still in contact with?
Well, you know, Elvira, and not too many other folks. You know, my neighbors in Prairieville think that I've already moved back to New Orleans now that my daughter and my grandkids are in college. I'm pretty much in my house maybe 5 days a month, and my neighbors get my newspaper and my mail, and I said, why? And my daughter said, Daddy, why are you still getting the Advocate paper in Baton Rouge and you're here? I said, well, I'm not reading them.
Again, Mr. Poree, this has been extremely informational. You've waxed eloquent not only about Pontchartrain Park, but about your life as it impacted upon your family, your current family. We appreciate your time, and as I stated, this has been a tremendous contribution. We thank you tremendously.
Look, I appreciate what you're doing, young Robinson, and then on behalf of your parents, who were really the kind of persons that I talked about before our neighborhood was infiltrated. They were the strong ones who made the difference in our lives. And I'm convinced that we still have a chance. And we ought to begin to invite people who dropped out of SUNO to come back so that they can tell the young people who are sitting in those chairs why they ought to pay much more attention to what's being articulated from behind the desk. Because sometimes we bring all of the A students back to the school. They're gonna make it anyhow. What we ought to bring back are the ones who failed in school to come back and tell them what it's really like out here to survive in today's world.
Just one closing question. What role did SUNO play in your family's life here in New Orleans?
Well, my daughter went to St. Mary's Academy from 7th grade to Wichita. She was third in her class. In the top 10 got scholarships, okay? And I think the Bennett girl was number 1 in her class. And we were so excited about Deidre. And when they start calling names, when they got to number 2, we getting ready to boast our chest. And they called number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and didn't call her name. And the daddy was about to go from being intelligent to a strong nigger, excuse the expression, okay? My wife said, leave it alone. And so we went to request to find out. You know what we found out? My sister-in-law, who was a nun, when Deidre was 3rd in class, said Deidre's parents can afford to send her to college. And that's why she didn't get what she earned. My daughter goes to Xavier. She had never had a C on a card. In her 3rd year at Xavier, she got a C in trigonometry and dropped out of school for 9 years. Couldn't handle it. And my mother told her, my mother was 90 years old, and said, you got too much in between. And she came to SUNO, working full-time in the post office, had 22 hours and finished magna cum laude.
Outstanding. Well, again, Mr. Poree, thank you. You've been a stupendous contributor to this programming project.
Well,
thank you.
You can get me back at the place and you don't need the cameras.
That's right.
We'll share. We do a thing that we trace back to Reverend Skinner's portrayal of when we got to America. And that story needs to be told because we hear HIS, his story, but we don't hear our story.
This has been a presentation of the Center for African and African American Studies at Southern University at New Orleans and the following sponsors: the National Park Service, the United States Department of the Interior through the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, and the Division of Historic Preservation.